Okay, last couple problems on the test, or on the review. Here we're doing secant negative pi over 3. So again, just like with all our other problems, we're going to find that coterminal angle first. Negative pi over 3 is not on our unit circle. Now at this point, if you're really comfortable with working with negative angles, since that's a small one and it's just down in quadrant 4, you can do that. I'm just going to keep showing finding the coterminal angle. Since we're in thirds, 2 pi is 6 pi over 3. And that's going to land us at 5 pi over 3. So our coterminal angle is 5 pi over 3. Now, when I'm working with secant, I like to find cosine first. So cosine at all of our thirds is 1/2. And 5 pi over 3 is in the fourth quadrant, so cosine is positive. And if I flip that fraction, I get 2 over 1, which is 2. Next. Cotangent of 3 pi over 4. At all of our pi over 4s, cotangent and tangent are either 1 or negative 1. 3 pi over 4 is in our second quadrant, and in the second quadrant, cotangent and tangent are negative. Now, if you would rather do cosine divided by sine for that one, cosine at 3 pi over 4 is negative radical 2 over 2, and sine at 3 pi over 4 is radical 2 over 2. So that gets you negative 1 as well. Whichever way you like. Okay. So, 20 pi. And we're doing cotangent. So there are a couple ways you can do this. First, you can subtract 2 pi, just like we've been doing with every other problem. Since this is in whole pies, we would subtract 2 pi, and we would do that 10 times in order to get back to our coterminal angle of 0. The other thing you can do is recognize that that's an even pi, and even pies are going to be coterminal with 0 and 2 pi, 0, 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, 8 pi, etc. And now, since we're doing cotangent, remember cotangent is cosine over sine. And I always do that ratio for cotangent, cosine over sine. For tangent, sine over cosine, if I'm dealing with a quadrantal angle. Cosine of 0 is 1. Sine of 0 is 0. And so cotangent of 20 pi is undefined. All right, just a couple more. Cosine of negative 7 pi over 2. Again, coterminal angle first. In halves, 2 pi is 4 pi over 2. That's going to give me negative 3 pi over 2. Still too small, so I'm going to add 2 pi again. And that's going to get me back to pi over 2. And so cosine of pi over 2 is 0. All right, more adding and subtracting here. Sine of negative 21 pi over 4. Okay, again with adding 2 pi. And in fourths, 2 pi is 8 pi over 4. So when I add 8 pi over 4 there, I get negative 13 pi over 4. I'm going to have to add 2 pi again 2 more times. But I'm just going to do it in stages here so I don't rush my math and make a silly mistake. Negative 13 pi over 4 plus 8 pi over 4 is negative 5 pi over 4. And I'm going to add 2 pi again. And that's going to get me to a coterminal angle of 3 pi over 4. At all my pi over 4s, sine is radical 2 over 2. 3 3 pi over 4 is quadrant 2, and sine is positive. We just did cosine. Our cotangent is 0. Again, I would just get into the habit of doing your ratio of cosine over sine. Cosine of 0 is 1. Sine of 0 is 0. So cotangent of 0 is undefined. Three more. Sine of negative 4 pi. Again, that's an even value, so it is going to be coterminal with 0. But I'm going to go ahead and add 2 pi. And add 2 pi again, just so I'm super comfortable with where I end up. And sine at 0 is 0. Okay, cotangent of 17 pi over 3. We're very close. 17 pi over 3. I'm going to have a lot of math to do with this one. Okay, so we're going to subtract 2 pi. And 2 pi in thirds here is 6 pi over 3. So that's going to get me down to 11 pi over 3. And I'm going to subtract 2 pi again. And that's going to get me down to 5 pi over 3. And that is on our unit circle. So I have tangent memorized. So I'll show you two different ways. I'll show you working with tangent of 5 pi over 3. Or since it's cotangent, cosine over sine. Tangent's going to be quicker. So here's how I work this, because I definitely don't have cotangent memorized quite as well as tangent. So at all my thirds, tangent is radical 3. 5 pi over 3, have to count around here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 pi over 3 is in the fourth quadrant, so tangent is negative. Now if I flip that to get cotangent, I'm going to end up with negative 1 over radical 3. And then I know that rationalizes to negative radical 3 over 3. If you want to do cosine divided by sine instead, again, we're in the fourth quadrant, so cosine is going to be positive and sine is going to be negative. At all my thirds, cosine is 1/2 and sine is radical 3 over 2. You can flip the second and multiply, and if you're doing that, you're flipping the bottom there. You can group if you're doing that. That's what this looks like. So your numerator is 1 times 2, and your denominator is 2 radical 3, and you have 1 positive and 1 negative, so you need a negative somewhere. Your 2's cancel, and then you can rationalize. And you get to that same answer of negative radical 3 over 3. Just keep in mind, since you started with cosine over sine, you don't need to flip that one. That's your final answer. When we started with tangent, we needed to flip it to get cotangent. Okay, very last one on the review. Our last problem here is cosine of 4 pi over 3. 4 pi over 3 is on our unit circle. It's in the third quadrant. At all of our thirds, cosine is 1/2. And in the third quadrant, cosine is negative. And that is your unit circle unit review. Again, please see me if you have any questions. Really memorize that first quadrant, be able to translate that into your other quadrants, and be able to work with coterminal angles. So you need to be really comfortable with adding and subtracting 2 pi. Awesome.